the gentle drizzle of a London evening in 1888, the kind of rain that seems to drift rather than fall, the city settles into a soft, drowsy hush. Street lamps glow like muted amber beads along Commercial Street, their light smudged by mist and turned blurry at the edges, as though the entire city has been wrapped in a warm woolen blanket. Horses clop lazily along the slick cobblestones, carriages rumble in the background, and now and then a distant whistle dissolves into the rain-soaked air. Everything feels unrushed, almost contemplative, as though the weather has gently encouraged London to lie down for a moment and breathe a little slower. Even the storefronts, worn a bit by time and drizzle, seem to lean in politely, listening to the soft patter that blankets the evening. At the narrow walkway leading up to 39 to 41 Commercial Street stands Arthur, our quietly determined wanderer, sheltered beneath the brim of a hat that has seen better months. His shoes are damp, his coat is thin, and in his pocket rests the entire fortune he has to his name tonight. 3 humble coins, clinking softly each time he shifts his weight. These 3 coins are not merely currency. Tonight they resemble the last slice of dessert at the end of a long week. Precious, comforting, and perhaps the only thing preventing the world from feeling a touch too overwhelming. Arthur rubs his thumb over the smooth edges of the coins, as though checking whether they are real or simply an imaginative wish conjured by the drizzle and dim light. In front of him looms the wooden sign of Victoria Homes, the modest lodging house whose very walls seem to sigh with age and gratitude for anyone willing to step inside. The lettering has faded with weather and time, but the building carries a kind of unassuming charm, as if politely acknowledging that while it may not be grand, it certainly tries its best. The structure leans a little to the left, like a tired man waiting for a bus that refuses to arrive. Still, its windows glow softly, reassuring Arthur that warmth, however humble, waits behind those slightly uneven walls. Arthur inhales gently, cautious about inhaling too deeply, as the London fog has a talent for surprising unsuspecting lungs with an abrupt cough. The rain dots his coat in quiet rhythm, and he feels the familiar combination of weariness and relief settle over him. For all its quirks, Victoria Homes is a dependable place, light and gentle enough, as many would say, especially compared to other establishments that promise a roof, but deliver more wildlife than lodging. Nothing too fancy, nothing too frightening, and certainly nothing that demands more than 3 coins from someone who has exactly 3 coins to offer. He glances around the quiet street, noting the puddles reflecting lamplight like tiny golden ponds. A lone newspaper, forgotten by whoever dropped it, flutters against the curb as though trying to find a comfortable position to sleep in. Arthur sympathizes with it. After all, he too is simply looking for a dry corner of the world, one that promises safety, warmth, and perhaps, if the universe is kind, a pillow that does not collapse like a soufflé under its own weight. With one more steadying breath, Arthur steps closer to the entrance. The rain forms a soft halo around the lantern above the door, making the small building look just a touch magical, as though resting beneath a spell of cozy hospitality. The wooden door stands slightly ajar, and from within drifts a faint glow of lamplight and the muffled hum of voices blending peacefully together. It is not a lively sound, nor a dreary one, more like the background murmur of a fireplace that tells you everything is quiet and reasonably safe. Arthur imagines the soft clatter of cups, the rustle of coats drying by the wall, and the warm sigh that comes from finally being indoors. Arthur wipes a bit of rain from his sleeve, straightens his posture, not too proud, not too hopeful, and places his hand lightly on the doorframe. His 3 coins shift in his pocket, chiming with the tiniest metallic affirmation, as though reminding him that they are still there and still important. In a world as unpredictable as London can be, especially on a misty night like this, sometimes all a person needs is a door, a warm room, and 3 coins that feel far more heroic than they look. And so, with the drizzle continuing its lullaby and the city humming softly around him, Arthur prepares to step inside Victoria Homes, grateful for the quiet promise of shelter. The evening stretches ahead in gentle shades of gray and gold, ready to wrap him in something almost like comfort. In the slow rhythm of the rain, in the soft glow of the lamps, and in the modest welcome of a building that leans slightly to one side, Arthur's night begins, not grandly, not dramatically, but calmly, steadily, and just warmly enough. As he pauses beneath the lantern's gentle glow, he lets the quiet settle over him like a soft shawl. The sound of the rain is steady and soothing, almost melodic, as though London itself is humming a slow tune. The door opens and the signature sent. Arthur finally eased the door open, and the soft creak that followed seemed to blend effortlessly with the rhythm of the rain behind him. The interior glow of Victoria Homes welcomed him in a mellow, unhurried way, a little like the warm sigh of someone settling into an old armchair. As the door swung inward, a faint swirl of indoor air drifted toward him, an air scented with a very distinctive personality. It was a mixture of damp wool, boiled vegetables, pipe smoke, and something that could only be described as historically meaningful. It was the kind of aroma that felt less like a smell and more like a long story told in a single breath. Most people might have hesitated, but Arthur simply blinked, adjusted his hat, and allowed the scent to settle gently around him like a quilt woven by time. Inside, the first thing he noticed was the soft hum of voices echoing through the hallway, a blend of murmurs that created a soothing, almost meditative backdrop. The wooden floorboards, worn smooth by years of footsteps, greeted him with a subtle warmth. A lantern hanging near the entrance cast a gentle circle of light, turning the moisture on Arthur's coat into small, shimmering beads. It was as though the room had decided to add a touch of sparkle in his honor, which felt pleasantly considerate for a building that leaned slightly to its left. He took another calm breath, letting the air settle comfortably in his chest, and closed the door behind him with quiet gratitude. Standing beneath the lantern was a man with a kindly, round face and a posture that suggested he had spent many years greeting weary travelers. This was Mr. Dalton, the caretaker of Victoria Homes, known for his habit of tilting his head when he spoke, as though he were listening to a tune only he could hear. His gray mustache curled at the tips in a cheerful shape, and the lines around his eyes hinted at a lifetime of offering shelter to those who needed it. He wore a vest that looked slightly too small, perhaps the result of one too many hearty suppers, but it gave him an endearing air of perpetual readiness. "Well now," Mr. Dalton murmured, his voice like warm bread fresh from the oven, soft and steady. "Looks like the rain's trying to keep everyone outdoors tonight, but you've made the wiser choice." He gave Arthur a friendly nod before glancing at the droplets on his coat. Come in, come in. No sense letting the cold chase you any further. His tone held no judgment, no curiosity, just a simple, pleasant acceptance, the kind of welcome that asked for nothing in return. Arthur reached into his pocket and felt the familiar jingle of his 3 coins. He drew them out with quiet care, mindful of how precious they were to him, and placed them gently into Mr. Dalton's waiting hand. The caretaker closed his fingers around them with a soft clink, as though handling an antique trinket rather than simple currency. 3 coins, Mr. Dalton said with a small smile that crinkled his eyes again. A fine number tonight. Strong, tidy, confident. They'll get you everything you need. His words drifted out as calmly as the lamplight, making the exchange feel less like a transaction and more like a comforting ritual. After depositing the coins into a small metal tray on his desk, Mr. Dalton reached for a wooden token hanging from a row of hooks. With a practiced motion, he took one, brushed a bit of dust from its surface, and placed it into Arthur's palm. The token was smooth from years of handling, faintly warm, and etched with a simple number in gently worn brass. "This will guide you," Mr. Dalton said with serene assurance. "Keep it close and follow the hallway to the main room. Everything else will find you in its own time." Arthur nodded quietly, appreciating the unhurried pace that Victoria Homes offered. There was no rush to understand, no urgent instructions, only a gentle unfolding of steps like a slow melody played on a rainy evening. The faint wooden smell of the token mingled with the lodge's signature aroma, forming a scent that was oddly comforting. It felt like the kind of object that would never get lost, even if he accidentally dropped it, mostly because it seemed too polite to roll away. Mr. Dalton, always one to offer a bit more than directions, gestured softly toward the hallway. "Mind the 3rd floorboard from the coat stand," he said in a tone of quiet amusement. "It squeaks like a startled mouse, perfectly harmless, but it does like to announce visitors. Don't let it surprise you." The comment was delivered with such gentle humor that Arthur couldn't help letting the tiniest smile tug at the corner of his mouth. A squeaky floorboard felt like exactly the kind of companionable detail one might expect in a place like this. The hallway ahead stretched out in a warm, golden glow, lit by lamps placed at careful intervals. Shadows moved lazily along the walls as people passed through unseen doorways, their footsteps softened by the well-worn wooden planks. Arthur took a slow step forward, letting the first footfall settle comfortably beneath him. The lodge felt old, yes, but it also felt lived in, peacefully so. Everything seemed softened, edges rounded, sounds muted. Even the air itself seemed to move with patient gentleness. It was as if every corner of Victoria Homes had agreed long ago to speak only in whispers. He continued down the hallway at an easy pace, letting the welcoming hush envelop him like a cozy shawl. The murmurs from the next room grew slightly clearer, the low hum of conversation, the faint clatter of a cup being set down, the warm shuffle of boots drying near the hearth. Each sound blended seamlessly into the next, creating a soothing tapestry that matched the steady heartbeat of the rain outside. Though Arthur was still damp from the weather, he felt the tension of the evening slip from his shoulders with each quiet step. The familiar glow of the lamps, the friendliness of Mr. Dalton, and the gentle noises drifting through the lodge all worked together like ingredients in a calming recipe. Nothing hurried him. Nothing demanded anything of him. Everything simply existed in a peaceful, sleepy harmony. And with that soft awareness guiding him, Arthur stepped fully into the hallway, token in hand, ready to let the restful world of Victoria Homes unfold before him, slowly, calmly, and just warmly enough. Wooden stairs, playing their soft, creaking melody. Arthur moved deeper into the hallway, guided by the soft lamps and the warm hush that floated gently through Victoria Homes. The wooden token rested comfortably in his palm, its smooth surface radiating a quiet confidence, as though it had guided countless guests along this same path. The gentle scent of old timber grew stronger with each step, wrapping around him like a whisper from another time. Everything in the lodge seemed to invite patience, calm, and an easy settling of breath, as though the building itself understood the art of unwinding. At the end of the corridor, he noticed a slightly darker opening that hinted at a stairway leading downward. A small sign hung above the frame, carved with simple lettering softened by time. To the kitchen. The words felt welcoming in their plainness, a quiet promise of warmth, and perhaps a touch of human presence. Arthur paused for a moment, letting the faint glow from the lamps guide his eyes, then stepped toward the descending path. The wooden stairs greeted him with a series of gentle creaks, each one sounding like the soft pluck of a sleepy instrument tuning itself for a lullaby. The boards beneath his feet flexed with the familiarity of age, comfortable in their task and unbothered by the years they had carried. Arthur found himself moving slowly, partly because the lighting grew dimmer with each step, and partly because the rhythm of the creaks felt oddly soothing, almost like a cozy musical accompaniment designed exclusively for his descent. Some steps groaned softly, others chirped with a faint, polite squeak. Altogether, they formed a strangely charming melody, the unofficial soundtrack of Victoria Homes. As he descended, the air grew warmer and richer, carrying with it scents far more pleasant than the distinctive bouquet that had greeted him at the entrance. This aroma spoke of simmering vegetables, the faint sweetness of baked bread, and the faintest trace of herbs carried through the warm air. The scents mingled gently, creating a comforting atmosphere that seemed to settle around Arthur like a woolen shawl draped over his shoulders. Whatever the cooks in the kitchen were preparing, it seemed crafted not for indulgence, but for quiet nourishment. The stairway opened into a wide basement kitchen, illuminated by several gas lamps that glowed with a soft golden hue. The light flickered gently against the walls, creating long shadows that danced lazily across the room. The glow made everything feel warm, calm, and pleasantly drowsy, like the kind of place one might wander into after a long day just to sit and breathe. Arthur's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing the size of the room, larger than he expected, yet still cozy in its own humble way. Long wooden tables filled the center space, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands and meals. The wood was scratched and marked from years of use, but the imperfections added to the room's gentle charm. Along the edges of the tables sat a few early diners, some leaning over steaming bowls, others simply resting their elbows as though gathering enough energy to lift a spoon required its own kind of ceremony. A few empty chairs sat at odd angles, as though waiting politely for their next occupant. The gas lamps overhead gave everything a warm, honey-colored glow. Their steady hum blended quietly with the soft clatter of utensils and the muffled sounds of boots brushing against the floor, Arthur found the entire scene disarmingly peaceful. There was no rush, no chatter, no bustling noise. Instead, the room held a tranquility that settled deeply, offering a gentle invitation to loosen one's shoulders and let thoughts drift at their own unhurried pace. Against the far wall stood a long counter with pots and pans arranged neatly, each one showing signs of honest use. A thick wooden ladle rested beside a pot of simmering broth, its gentle bubbles rising at a rhythm that matched the slow breathing of the room. A kettle puffed a soft trail of steam, filling the air with a mild herbal scent. Even the utensils seemed to move slower here, as though the entire kitchen had collectively agreed on a tempo meant for relaxation. A few people wrapped in coats that had dried unevenly sat quietly at the closest table. One man rested his chin on his hands, staring dreamily into his bowl, as though contemplating not the food, but the warmth rising from it. Another gently tapped a finger against his mug, creating a sleepy rhythm that blended effortlessly with the creaking stairway behind Arthur. A third leaned back, with eyes half closed, perhaps listening to the faint hum of the gas lamps with the admiration of someone hearing a familiar lullaby. Arthur stepped forward, his boots making a soft thud on the wooden floor, and the warmth of the room embraced him fully. The gentle yellow light softened the edges of everything it touched, blurring the sharpness of the world into something more comforting. Even the occasional cough from a weary lodger seemed muted and harmless, blending into the background like a quiet reminder that this was a place of rest, however simple. A chair near the end of one of the long tables sat slightly pulled out, as though someone had prepared it just for him. Arthur approached it slowly, grateful for the unspoken invitation, and let himself take in the room one more time before sitting. The kitchen was far from elegant, yet it held a sense of familiarity, like a family memory that one can't quite place but still feels warmly attached to. Here, beneath the low glow of the lamps and surrounded by the soft murmur of life unwinding, Arthur felt the weight of the damp evening slide away. The kitchen didn't ask questions, didn't demand anything of him. It simply offered a place, a moment, and a calm, steady light. And in the quiet rhythm of the room, Arthur allowed himself to settle, letting the warmth seep into his bones as gently as the rain had soaked into the London streets above. A creative menu and Bram's gentle arrival. Arthur settled comfortably at the long wooden table, letting the soft warmth of the kitchen seep into his coat and relax his tired shoulders. The gentle hum of activity around him blended into a soothing background, as if the entire room had agreed to move at a pace designed specifically for resting minds. He watched the flicker of the gas lamps above, their golden glow casting slow-moving shadows across the walls, creating an ambience that felt almost like a lullaby wrapped in light. In this unhurried atmosphere, Arthur felt a sense of quiet belonging settle over him, as though the kitchen had opened its arms in a simple, wordless welcome. At the far end of the table sat a man engaged in what could generously be called an inventive culinary technique. He'd placed a modest piece of bread directly onto the worn wooden surface, sprinkled a tiny pile of salt beside it, and was carefully dipping the edge of the bread into the salt as though participating in a ritual of great sophistication. Arthur admired the man's serene dedication, watching as he tapped away excess grains with a delicate precision one might reserve for handling priceless gems. The whole process carried a gentle air of respectfulness, as though the bread and salt were taking part in a ceremonial dance of minimalism. Arthur found the sight quietly charming, the kind of gentle humor that needed no laughter to be appreciated. Just a few seats over, another individual was engaged in an equally unique culinary adventure. Before him lay a small portion of fish that appeared to have seen brighter days, though he approached it with the calm of someone well practiced in such matters. With the care of a jeweler inspecting fine stones, he examined each section, removing the parts that seemed uncertain and setting aside the remainder with a soft sort of optimism. His movements were slow and unbothered, almost graceful in their patience. Every now and then he nodded in approval at a particularly satisfactory bite, as though acknowledging the fish for offering its best under the circumstances. Arthur watched him with a sense of peaceful fascination, appreciating the quiet resilience woven into the simple ritual. As Arthur observed these scenes of quiet creativity, a soft, shuffling sound approached from behind him. When he turned, he saw a tall, slender figure with a slight stoop, as though his height had always been just a touch inconvenient. This was Bram, a man whose gentle presence seemed to blend seamlessly into every room he entered. His clothes hung loosely on him, giving him the appearance of a friendly shadow, and his eyes held a mild sparkle that suggested he viewed life through a lens of understated amusement. Bram's movements were slow and deliberate, as if he preferred to glide rather than walk. "Evening," Bram said in a voice soft enough to be mistaken for part of the room's general hush. "Quite the feast tonight." His tone carried no sarcasm, only a quiet appreciation for the unassuming meal shared among them. He lowered himself onto the bench beside Arthur, with the careful grace of someone accustomed to sitting in creaky chairs and wishing earnestly not to wake them. Arthur returned the nod, feeling a comfortable ease settle between them, as if Bram's presence naturally encouraged calm. There was something about him, perhaps the soft humor tucked into his expression or the unhurried cadence of his movements, that made it easy to relax. Bram rested his elbows lightly on the table, glancing around the room with the familiarity of someone who had long ago accepted every quirk and charm within it. Without a word, Bram reached into his coat and withdrew a small piece of bread, wrapped in what might have once been a handkerchief, but now resembled a square of fabric nearing retirement. He unwrapped it carefully as though presenting a treasured artifact and broke it in half. One piece he kept, the other he offered to Arthur with an easy, unobtrusive gesture. "Bit of bread," he murmured, "better shared than not." Arthur accepted the piece with gentle gratitude. The bread was simple, slightly uneven in texture, and carried a faint warmth that suggested it had been kept close to a pocket for some time. He took a small bite, allowing the mild flavor to settle comfortably across his senses. There was something soothing about it, perhaps not luxurious, but undeniably grounding. Bram watched him take the bite with a small, satisfied nod, as though pleased not with the bread itself, but with the quiet connection the act created. The room continued its soft symphony of subtle sounds, the gentle clink of utensils, the quiet rustle of sleeves, the muted steps of someone moving toward the kettle. Everything felt aligned to a single purpose: rest, warmth, and the small comfort of shared presence. Even the creaks from the ceiling above seemed to join in the slow rhythm, as if the entire building breathed alongside its occupants. Arthur found that each sound carried a soothing steadiness, something that gently invited his thoughts to settle. Bram leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but attentive in a gentle, meandering way. "Funny thing about meals here," he said softly. "They're never quite the same twice, but they always seem to settle the day just enough." His words drifted into the warm air with a kind friendliness, blending naturally into the room's peaceful murmur. Arthur nodded slowly, feeling the truth of Bram's remark in the warmth spreading through him. The bread, the company, the soft glow of the lamps, all of it combined into a sense of quiet belonging, modest but sincere. He let his shoulders relax further, grateful for the moment, for the stillness, and for the simple gift of a shared piece of bread in a kitchen lit like a candle-lit dream. The evening unfolded gently around them, each soft sound and subtle movement weaving itself into a calm tapestry that wrapped the two men in unspoken comfort. The quiet habits of the lodgers. The quiet inside the kitchen deepened as the evening settled, not the heavy kind of silence that presses against the ribs, but the soft, breathable kind that lets the mind drift as gently as dust in lantern light. Around Arthur and Bram, the room continued in its slow rhythm, each sound muted, as though the walls themselves had agreed to keep everything pleasantly calm. The day had worn down most of the guests, leaving them too tired for conversation, but not too weary to appreciate the comfort of simple company. Arthur noticed how naturally the hush embraced everyone seated nearby. Most of the men rested their elbows on the worn tabletops, gazing absently into their cups or bowls. Some leaned back against the bench with a long, steady exhale, letting their thoughts drift lazily in the warm glow. Even the clatter of someone setting down a spoon felt softened, cushioned by the gentle hum that lingered between breaths. This wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the peaceful stillness of people who had simply run out of words for the night. Down the table, a young man with loose curls and a cheerful, crooked smile briefly caught Arthur's attention. This was Lewis, who seemed to carry a natural lightness with him, the kind that didn't push into the room but settled quietly in the corners. His boots were damp, his jacket slightly oversized, but he sat at ease, shifting between sitting upright and leaning forward with a relaxed sway. There was a soft curiosity in his eyes as he watched the room, not in search of trouble or stories, but simply admiring the way people fit naturally into silence. Lewis lifted a cup of something warm, tea or perhaps a very confident-looking broth, and blew across its surface with an exaggerated gentleness, as though trying not to disturb the steam. The gesture made Arthur smile faintly. There was a kind of humor to it, not loud or boastful, but softly warming like a wink from someone who enjoyed making things feel a bit lighter for others. Across from Lewis sat Jonas, a sturdier man, with a build shaped by years of lifting crates, tools, and perhaps entire days on his shoulders. His posture was relaxed, but he carried an ease that came from long familiarity with hard work. His large hands rested peacefully on the table, fingers lightly tapping an absent rhythm that added a faint heartbeat to the quiet room. Jonas had a calm presence, deep and steady, like the grounding warmth of coals beneath a fire. Though Lewis and Jonas sat close, they did not speak. They didn't need to. The kitchen carried an unspoken understanding that tonight's rest did not require conversation. Everyone seemed to know that this stillness, gentle, steady, comforting, was one of the few luxuries Victoria homes offered. And rather than disturb it, the room embraced the quiet like a familiar tradition. A few more lodgers dotted the benches nearby. One man, likely a dock worker judging by the faint scent of rope and brine clinging to his coat, sat with his eyes half closed, swirling the last bit of liquid in his mug with slow rotations. Another, whose hands bore the faint dusting of brick or plaster, leaned forward with his chin nearly touching the table, drifting into the lightest doze without fully committing to sleep. Yet another, dressed in simpler cloth, traced circles on the wooden surface with the tip of his finger, creating small worlds only he could see. Arthur took in the scene carefully, letting its tranquility soften him from the inside. The workers around him looked worn, yes, but not defeated, just comfortably subdued after a long day. Their clothes were faded, their boots scuffed, and their breaths deep and steady. These were men shaped by honest labor, men whose silence came not from sorrow, but from the simple fact that exhaustion had already spoken enough for them. He listened to the subtle textures of the quiet, the gentle sigh of someone stretching his back, the faint hum of breath rising and falling in peaceful unison, the soft scrape of a bowl being nudged slightly to the side. Even the far-off pop of a gas lamp adjusting itself felt like part of the room's lullaby. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of softness, like a blanket shared among many shoulders. Lewis eventually shifted, pulling his legs beneath him as he settled into a more comfortable position. He cast a small glance toward Arthur, not to start a conversation, but simply to acknowledge his presence with a friendly flicker of recognition. Jonas responded to the gesture with a small, sleepy nod, as though agreeing that friendliness required no words tonight. It was the kind of quiet companionship that didn't need names or stories, just shared warmth and a place to sit. Arthur felt grateful for the gentleness of it all. Here, no one demanded attention, no one required explanations. The men around him accepted the quiet in the same way they accepted their meals, simply, evenly, and with the practical understanding that rest was as vital as food. The silence wrapped the room in a peaceful stillness that seemed to slow even time itself, letting it drift unhurriedly like a feather floating toward the floor. Bram shifted slightly beside him, adjusting his long frame to find a better angle against the bench. He didn't speak either. He didn't need to. His presence, calm and soft-spoken, fit naturally into the room's gentle quiet. A faint smile hovered on his lips, the kind of smile worn by someone who appreciated the quiet more than chatter. Arthur mirrored the expression without realizing it, feeling the warm reassurance of simply being among others who sought nothing more than rest. Around them, the kitchen continued its slow breathing. Lamps glowed, chairs rested, footsteps grew fewer, and the soft warmth in the air settled even deeper. Nothing rushed, nothing intruded, nothing demanded anything at all. It was a moment that held itself softly, like cupped hands protecting a fragile flame. And in that calm, steady silence, Arthur let his thoughts drift as peacefully as the steam rising from a cooling cup, content to share the quiet with the tired, good-hearted souls around him. The smoking room and the little token. Arthur rose slowly from the kitchen bench, savoring the gentle warmth that clung to him as he stepped away from the table. The soft hum of the gas lamps followed him into the hallway like a sleepy companion, guiding him toward the next quiet corner of Victoria Homes. His wooden token rested securely in his hand, its smooth surface reminding him of his small but comforting claim to a bed later that night. For now, though, he felt a mild curiosity tugging him up the narrow staircase, inviting him to explore the smoking room he had heard murmurs about. It wasn't excitement exactly, just a soft, drifting interest, the kind that matched the slow rhythm of the evening. The stairs creaked under his boots in their familiar, musical way. Some steps chirped politely, others stretched with long, lazy groans, and together they created a slow rhythm that seemed almost delighted to accompany him. Arthur found the sound soothing, like the soft crackle of a distant fireplace. By the time he reached the landing, his shoulders had relaxed completely, and the calm of the building had wrapped around him like a comfortable shawl. Ahead, he saw the faint haze of tobacco smoke drifting under the doorway, glowing softly in the mellow lamplight. When he stepped inside, the air felt pleasantly thicker, warmed by pipes and soft conversation. The lamps here were slightly dim, their glow filtered through the haze in gentle waves. A small billiard table stood in the center of the room, its green surface dulled by age and use, but unmistakably loved by those who gathered around it. Two men stood over the table with cues in hand, studying the balls with great seriousness, though their slightly hunched postures suggested the seriousness was mostly for show. One tapped the cue ball lightly, sending it drifting across the felt with leisurely determination. A few men sat along the benches pressed against the walls, their silhouettes softened by smoke. Some puffed quietly on their pipes, blowing out little clouds that drifted upward like lazy ghosts. Others flipped through old newspapers, turning pages with the unhurried grace of people who had nowhere else to be. Arthur watched them with a growing sense of peace, the room's rhythm aligning effortlessly with the sleepy lull of the evening. He wandered closer to the billiard table, not to play, but simply to admire its charming imperfections. A few scuff marks decorated the felt in irregular patterns, and the wooden railings bore the evidence of decades of enthusiastic taps and nudges. One of the players, a man with a cheerful beard that seemed to curl on its own, glanced at Arthur and offered a friendly nod. Arthur returned it with a quiet smile. The man then lined up a shot with great ceremony, only for the cue ball to roll with meandering slowness and tap another ball with a sound so faint it seemed politely ashamed of itself. Arthur drifted to a bench near the wall, sitting beside a couple of men who appeared deeply invested in comparing the smoke rings they were attempting to form. One succeeded, sending a lopsided ring floating upward, while the other produced something that resembled more of a wiggly line. Neither seemed offended by the outcomes. Instead, they chuckled softly, their voices blending into the mellow murmur of the room. Arthur let his gaze wander again, savoring the harmony of quiet activity around him. Time passed gently, unmeasured, and unhurried. Eventually, a soft bell chimed from downstairs, carrying through the hallways with the mild insistence of someone tapping a spoon on a cup. The men in the smoking room responded with slow, practiced movements, finishing their pipefuls, stacking their cue sticks, and stretching in ways that suggested their bodies had long mastered the art of easing into the night. Arthur rose with them, feeling the calm weight of the hour settle comfortably over him. He made his way back down the stairs, following the golden lamps to the small reception corner where the beds were assigned. The air here carried a touch of draft, but it wasn't unfriendly. Just a reminder that the building liked to breathe. A tall man with a tidy vest and a posture that hinted at long hours of responsibility stood behind a small wooden desk. His name, Arthur remembered, was Mr. Hargreaves, the manager in charge of ensuring everyone's lodging was in proper order. Mr. Hargreaves had a composed, steady presence, like someone who could sort out tangled string without ever tugging too hard. His hair was neatly parted, though a few rebellious strands refused to cooperate, giving him an endearing air of mild elegance. He greeted the lodgers one by one, taking their tokens and returning calm instructions with the ease of someone who preferred quiet predictability. When Arthur stepped forward, Mr. Hargreaves offered a warm nod. "Token, please," he said, in a voice that carried the soft weight of routine. Arthur handed over the wooden piece, and Mr. Hargreaves examined it briefly before consulting a small list beside him. The faint scratch of his pencil added another soothing note to the evening's gentle sounds. "Second floor," Mr. Hargreaves murmured. "Room along the left corridor. Your bed is marked." He slid the token into a box with the rest, then gestured with a polite tilt of his head. "Take your time. The corridors can be a bit sleepy at this hour." Arthur thanked him quietly, appreciating the manager's mild humor. He turned toward the staircase once more, carrying with him the peaceful assurance that a place to rest awaited him. A simple bed in a calm building that leaned just slightly, breathed softly, and held its guests with the gentle understanding of a long, restful night. The small cabin and its tiny residence. Arthur climbed the staircase with the measured steps of someone preparing for rest rather than adventure. The warm hush of Victoria homes wrapped around him like a soft shawl, and each lamp he passed added a gentle pool of golden light to guide his way. The second floor was quieter than the one below, holding the kind of silence that seemed to sway lightly in the air, as if even the dust motes had agreed to float more slowly at this hour. He moved along the left corridor just as Mr. Hargreaves had instructed, his fingers brushing the textured wall that carried the faint scent of old timber and soap. The corridor stretched in a calm, narrow line, and as Arthur walked, he noticed the rhythmic pattern of doors, each identical in shape, but with small, slightly uneven marks that gave them individual character. The wood creaked softly beneath his boots, not in protest, but in a conversational sort of way, as though politely acknowledging his presence. When he found the door with a small chalk mark near the bottom, he paused for a moment, letting the stillness settle around him like a comfortable blanket. He pushed the door open with a steady hand. Inside, the room greeted him with the modest charm typical of Victoria homes. It was small, but had a certain quiet dignity to it, like a space that had seen countless nights and understood the delicate art of simply existing. A single bed sat tucked neatly against the far wall, its frame slightly tilted, but holding itself together with admirable determination. The thin mattress dipped gently in the middle, shaped by years of guests who had rested there before him. Over it lay a blanket, coarse perhaps, but warm-looking, folded with surprising care. Arthur stepped inside and closed the door behind him, letting the latch click softly. The faint glow from the lantern hanging in the hallway slipped through the narrow crack beneath the door and stretched across the floor in a pale ribbon. He set his coat on the peg near the wall and approached the bed, with the slow caution of someone prepared for anything, even the possibility of springs that might express their opinions loudly. To his relief, the bed remained politely silent. He sat down, feeling the mattress sink beneath him with a tired sigh, as though it too had had a long day. The blanket felt rough beneath his fingertips, but not unpleasant, more like the texture of an old sweater knitted by someone with practical sensibilities. He smoothed his hand across it, appreciating the simplicity of the space. There were no frills, no decorations, nothing unnecessary. Just a bed, a small wooden shelf, and enough room to breathe without bumping into anything. As Arthur stretched out on the mattress, he became aware of a faint but familiar sensation. A slight shuffle, a tiny movement in the fabric near his elbow. He paused, then exhaled slowly, recognizing the telltale signs of Victoria Holmes's unofficial residence, the bedbugs, or, as many called them with a mixture of resignation and humor, the tiny athletic team. The nickname had developed over time, partly out of necessity and partly because the creatures seemed to possess remarkable endurance and team spirit. According to the regulars, these minuscule athletes trained nightly, practicing synchronized sprints and high jumps, though always with courteous subtlety. Arthur imagined them wearing miniature headbands, warming up like dedicated competitors preparing for a championship that no one had officially organized. He shifted slightly, offering them as little encouragement as possible. The mattress rustled softly beneath him, and for a moment he pictured the tiny team lining up in confusion, whispering among themselves about the unexpected terrain change. The thought brought a faint smile to his face. Humor, especially the quiet kind, worked wonders in places like these. Settling deeper into the bed, Arthur pulled the blanket up to his chest. The coarse fabric scratched lightly against his skin, but felt reassuringly sturdy, like a companion that didn't mind staying awake while he drifted off. The faint sounds of the building, distant footsteps, a door closing softly, the gentle exhale of someone in a neighboring room, merged into a steady backdrop that lulled him toward rest. The lantern light under the door dimmed as someone turned down the wick in the hallway. Darkness filled the room gradually, settling in soft layers rather than sharp lines. Arthur breathed in deeply, letting the air fill his chest with the quiet scent of the old boards, the mattress, and the lingering trace of soap someone must have used earlier. Everything felt stable, calm, and just worn enough to be trustworthy. He lay still, feeling the rhythm of his breathing slowly match the steady pulse of the building. It was easy to imagine Victoria Holmes as a great slumbering creature, gentle, tired, and offering shelter without asking for anything in return. The mattress dipped around him in a way that suggested it understood the art of cradling. The tiny athletic team beneath the blanket seemed to settle into their own resting positions, as if agreeing to postpone their nightly antics until Arthur had fallen fully asleep. He closed his eyes, allowing the dark to soften the edges of his thoughts. Nothing rushed, nothing tugged. His mind drifted through calm currents, touching lightly on the warmth of the kitchen earlier, the soft haze of the smoking room, the quiet nod from Mr. Hargreaves. Everything felt wrapped in a slow, steady rhythm that soothed the last clinging pieces of wakefulness. Arthur exhaled quietly. The mattress sighed in response, and just like that, the peaceful night carried him gently toward sleep, softly, steadily, and with the comforting presence of Victoria Holmes surrounding him like a long, warm breath. the early bell, and the search for work. Arthur drifted in and out of gentle dreams, the kind that feel like warm fog drifting through half-opened windows. The quiet breathing of Victoria Holmes pulsed softly around him, a calm companion through the night. The blanket weighed comfortably over his chest, and even the tiny athletic team beneath the mattress seemed to respect his slumber, limiting their movements to very polite warm-ups. Everything felt slow, steady, and pleasantly suspended, until the moment it didn't. At precisely 5:30 a.m., a bell rang through the building, with all the subtlety of a spoon striking the inside of a metal bucket. It wasn't harsh or alarming, but it had a remarkable clarity that suggested it had been ringing reliably at this exact moment for many, many mornings. It carried the tone of a tradition no one particularly adored, but everyone accepted, like an old uncle who told the same stories every holiday dinner. The bell chimed again, steady and firm, encouraging the lodge to wake with a gentle but undeniable nudge. Arthur blinked awake, staring at the dim rectangle of light beneath the door. For a moment he wasn't entirely sure where he was, floating in that pleasant fog between dreaming and remembering. Then the familiar scent of the wooden boards, the slight dip in his mattress, and the soft shuffle of others rising brought him fully back into his small room in Victoria Holmes. The morning air felt cool against his face, and the blanket clung to him with the affectionate stubbornness of something that wasn't quite ready to say goodbye. He sat up slowly, giving the tiny athletic team beneath him fair warning that the field of play was about to shift. They responded with a small rustle, as if adjusting their imaginary headbands for a new day's warm-up. Arthur ran a hand over his face and rubbed the sleep from his eyes, letting the calm remnants of the night settle before he moved. Outside the room, he heard the quiet murmur of footsteps, soft thuds, slow shuffles, and the occasional yawn that slipped out like a stray breeze. The other lodgers were waking with similar reluctance, all of them bound by the unspoken understanding that Victoria Holmes greeted the morning firmly, whether its guests were ready or not. Arthur gathered his coat from the wall peg, slipping it on with the ease of routine, though his shoulders still carried a touch of drowsy heaviness. The cool hallway greeted him with a faint draft, and the floorboards beneath his feet offered their familiar creaks. Lower in pitch this time, as if they too were still stretching into wakefulness. Lamps burned low, their glow gentle and patient, illuminating the corridor in a soft amber haze. People emerged from their rooms one by one, moving with the slow precision of early risers who had learned the value of conserving energy. Lewis appeared further down the hall, hair rumpled as though he had attempted to negotiate with his pillow during the night. He nodded groggily at Arthur before wandering toward the stairs. Jonas followed shortly after, his large frame moving with the deliberate steadiness of someone who had lifted heavy things in many lifetimes and intended to save his strength for whatever heavy things awaited today. The hush of morning carried through the building, not tense, but peacefully subdued. Men tied their boots quietly, pulled on coats with soft grunts, and exchanged nods instead of words. No one seemed interested in conversation, and the silence felt natural, a shared agreement that thoughts were best kept warm and undisturbed until later. Arthur joined the slow stream moving toward the lower floor. The faint aroma of something warm drifted upward, perhaps tea or porridge beginning its daily duties. The kitchen, like everything in Victoria Holmes, woke early and without complaint. As Arthur stepped into the room, he found a small cluster of lodgers already gathered around the long table, sipping from steaming mugs with the solemn reverence usually reserved for ceremonial events. Each sip looked like it added a tiny spark of life back into them. Arthur accepted a small cup when it made its way to him, wrapping his cold fingers around the warm ceramic. The tea wasn't strong, but it carried a mild, steady comfort, something to anchor the day without demanding too much of it. He drank slowly, letting the warmth settle into him like gentle sunlight through a window. As he finished, he felt a quiet resolve gather within him. Today he would begin his search for work. It wasn't a grand mission nor a desperate scramble. It was simply the next step, approached with the same steady rhythm that Victoria Homes encouraged. He knew the docks might offer day labor, and though the work could be hard, it was honest and familiar enough for someone willing to expend effort and patience. He stepped outside into the early morning air. London greeted him with a sky still wrapped in dawn's pale blue-gray, the streets glistening from the night's dew. The city felt quieter at this hour, as though it too was rubbing the sleep from its eyes. The far-off gulls near the river called out with lazy voices, and somewhere a cart creaked its way over cobblestones, beginning its morning route. Arthur inhaled the cool air deeply, feeling it freshen the last threads of sleep clinging to him. He walked toward the direction of the docks with a calm, steady pace. There was no hurry. The city stretched before him in soft shades, and the path ahead felt open. Not easy, but inviting enough for someone willing to take one step, then another. His boots tapped quietly on the stone, joining the gentle chorus of early morning sounds. The day had begun, and Arthur moved into it with quiet purpose, carried forward by the lingering warmth of Victoria Homes and the small hope tucked steadily in his chest. A gentle day of labor. The early morning light drifted softly across London's quiet streets as Arthur made his way toward the docks, each step steady and unhurried. The air still carried the cool freshness of dawn, wrapped in a pale mist that softened the outlines of buildings and chimneys. The world felt calm in its sleepy awakening, as though the entire city had decided to speak in whispers until the sun fully stretched its arms. Arthur found the peace comforting, a calm backdrop for whatever the day might bring. As he rounded a corner, a familiar figure emerged from between two narrow buildings, waving with the slow enthusiasm of someone whose energy was still warming itself awake. It was Lewis, the young man from Victoria Homes, whose crooked smile seemed to brighten even the grayest alleyways. His hair was still tousled in a charmingly rebellious fashion, and his jacket appeared only half-buttoned, as though he had attempted to dress while negotiating with gravity. "Morning, Arthur," Lewis said, his voice carrying a soft rasp that suggested he had spoken exactly 3 words since waking. "Fancy seeing you out this early. Thought I'd be the only one wandering about before the streets remember how to be busy." Arthur offered a small, warm smile, heading to the docks, hoping to find something to do before the day decides it's done with me. Lewis laughed lightly, a cheerful sound that fluttered through the mist like a small bird. "Well, that makes 2 of us. If we look determined enough, someone might take pity and hand us a crate or 2. The pair walked side by side, their footsteps soft on the damp cobblestones. London's morning unfolded around them in gentle scenes. A milk cart rattled past, pulled by a patient horse who looked convinced the city owed him several extra hours of sleep. A lamplighter extinguished the last flame of the night's lamps with slow, practiced motions. A baker opened his shutters, releasing a faint warmth and the hope of fresh bread into the chill air. Everything moved with a rhythm that felt quietly orchestrated, like a lullaby performed in the language of daily life. As they approached the riverfront, the docks began to stir. Workers shuffled into place with mugs of tea still warming their hands. Seagulls circled above in lazy spirals, calling down with the self-importance of creatures who considered themselves supervisors of human labor. Crates of various sizes lay in uneven stacks near a cargo warehouse, waiting for the day's team of temporary laborers. Lewis nudged Arthur gently with his elbow. "Look there," he murmured. A stout man wearing a vest and carrying a clipboard stood at the entrance, scanning what appeared to be a list of tasks for the day. His expression held the calm indifference of someone who had seen countless mornings like this and expected no surprises from any of them. Arthur and Lewis approached him with respectful quietness. The man glanced up, taking in their faces and their posture, both alert enough to work, but not so eager as to be suspicious. After a brief pause, he pointed to a cluster of crates nearby. "You two," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Need those moved from here to the far warehouse. Just a few hours' worth. Pay at midday." Arthur nodded, and Lewis offered a grateful smile. There was no flourish, no grand gesture, just simple work agreed upon with gentle efficiency. The man returned to his clipboard, leaving the two friends to begin their task. The crates were light enough for comfortable lifting, though awkward in shape, requiring a slow, steady rhythm. Arthur found the work reassuring, a kind of physical meditation where the mind could wander peacefully, while the body followed familiar motions. Lewis, ever the source of soft humor, occasionally muttered quietly encouraging words to the crates, as though thanking them for being cooperative. With each step between the warehouse and the storage hall, London continued its slow transformation from drowsy dawn to a mild morning. The river glimmered with a pale silver sheen, the gentle waves brushing the docks like a cat rubbing against a familiar leg. Boats bobbed lazily, waiting for their crews to rouse them into purposeful movement. Workers chatted in soft tones, their words drifting across the air like threads weaving a tapestry of simple routine. Between loads, Arthur paused briefly to stretch his shoulders. Lewis stood beside him, squinting at the sky. "Funny, isn't it?" he said softly. "How a bit of work feels lighter with good company. If I were doing this alone, I'd probably still be negotiating with the first crate." Arthur chuckled gently. "They might negotiate back." Lewis nodded with dramatic seriousness. Exactly why teamwork is essential. They continued their task at a comfortable pace, neither rushed nor strained. The hours slipped by with the quiet ease of pages turning in a well-worn book. The workers around them created a soothing ambience, soft grunts of effort, the scrape of crates being slid into place, the occasional laughter drifting from a distant group. The rhythm of the docks became a warm hum that settled around them like a gentle blanket. By midday, the man with the clipboard returned, handing them a modest pay for their morning's work. It wasn't much, but it was enough, and earned with calm steadiness rather than hardship. Arthur slipped the coins into his pocket with quiet gratitude, feeling the weight of accomplishment in their metallic warmth. Lewis stretched, letting out a long, satisfied sigh. "Well," he said softly, "that wasn't a bad way to start the day." Light labor, good company, and the city behaving itself for once. Arthur nodded, gazing at the river. The sun, now peeking brighter through the mist, cast a soft shimmer across the water's surface. Everything felt peaceful, unhurried, and just gentle enough to imagine the day unfolding with equal harmony. Side by side, the two men began walking back toward the quieter streets, content with the morning's work and the calm stillness that continued to follow them. Soup, wind, and the East End. The walk back toward the East End unfolded at an easy, restful pace, as though the streets themselves had decided to stretch out slowly for Arthur and Lewis. The morning mist had begun to drift upward, thinning like a sleepy curtain being gently pulled aside. A soft breeze brushed along the edges of the cobblestones, cool but not unfriendly, carrying with it the faint sense of bread, river water, and fireplaces preparing for the day. The calm hum of London life grew gradually stronger, but in a warm, unhurried way that matched the quiet rhythm the two men carried within them. After a few turns down narrow streets, lined with uneven rooftops, Lewis nudged Arthur's arm and pointed ahead. "There," he murmured softly. A small soup kitchen, tucked neatly between a candle shop and a row of cramped brick houses, waited beneath a wooden sign that wobbled gently in the breeze. The lettering was faded but welcoming, promising warm broth and a moment of rest in exchange for a very small coin. The place looked modest, but in a comforting way, like a pair of worn slippers that always fit just right. Arthur and Lewis joined the short line of workers queuing outside. The air carried the mild aroma of vegetables simmering somewhere deep within the building, along with the quiet murmur of those waiting. No one seemed impatient. The line moved with the relaxed understanding that everything in this part of London operated according to its own steady tempo. A cart rumbled slowly by. A child darted across the street with a bundle of newspapers under his arm. A woman watering flowers in a window box paused to listen to the faint chatter below. Each sound layered into the soft morning soundtrack. When their turn arrived, Arthur stepped inside and felt the immediate embrace of warm air scented with boiled potatoes, carrots, and the unmistakable hint of kitchen steam. The soup kitchen was small, barely more than a single room with long benches and a counter where two women ladled out broth, but the atmosphere hummed with gentle purpose. The walls were adorned with mismatched tin plates, likely donated long ago, and the floor carried the familiar scuff marks of countless boots. Yet the light filtering through the windows gave everything a soft glow, making the room feel like a pocket of warmth tucked within the larger chill of London. Arthur received his bowl, a simple tin dish filled with watery soup that tried its best to look hearty. The vegetables floated with shy determination, as though aware of their modest abilities, but eager to contribute to someone's comfort. Lewis took his own bowl and sniffed it with theatrical consideration. "Thin," he whispered, "but polite." Arthur stifled a chuckle as they found seats at the end of a long wooden bench. As they ate, the room filled slowly with the quiet hum of conversation. Not lively chatter, but soft fragments, gentle remarks, tired reflections. Brief greetings passed between those who saw each other often, but seldom spoke at length. The soup, though simple, warmed Arthur from the inside, its steam curling upward like a faint, friendly ghost, rising to stretch after a long night. Each spoonful felt like a small reminder that comfort did not always need to be elaborate. Across from Arthur, a pair of immigrant workers conversed in low tones, their words weaving together in a language he didn't recognize. Their gestures, however, were easy to follow. A shared laugh, a lift of eyebrows, a shrug of shoulders, signs of men finding humor in the day despite its challenges. Their coats carried the faint dust of ship cargo, and their hands were thick with calluses, but the softness in their eyes and the relaxed curve of their posture suggested a moment of peace. Near the wall, two older men spoke gently in Irish accents, their voices rising and falling like the calm tide. One stirred his soup, absent-mindedly while describing a job he hoped to find later in the afternoon. The other nodded with slow encouragement, offering murmured responses that blended seamlessly into the surroundings. Their presence added a steady, grounding note to the room's gentle symphony. At a nearby bench, a young woman of Eastern European descent wiped her hands on a cloth as she shared warm bread with a small boy beside her. Their eyes carried a quiet resilience. Tired, perhaps, but steady. Arthur watched with unobtrusive curiosity as the woman poured a bit of her soup into the boy's bowl, nudging it closer to him with a reassuring smile. There was tenderness in her movements, softened by the weariness of someone who had seen too much, but still insisted on offering kindness wherever she could. The room held people from all corners of the world: Irish, Jewish, Caribbean, Eastern European, sailors from distant ports, laborers who had walked long roads to reach London's promise of opportunity. But here, in this warm kitchen, labels dissolved. Everyone shared the same simple spoonfuls of soup, the same wooden benches, the same momentary pause from the noise of the streets. The air around them shimmered with a quiet harmony that soothed Arthur deeply. Lewis took another bite and sighed contentedly. "You know," he said in a whisper, "I've had thicker soups, thinner soups, soups that tasted like dreams, and soups that tasted like bills. But this one has the perfect personality for a morning like this." His expression remained perfectly serious for a beat before he smiled at his own words. Arthur laughed softly, the sound blending easily with the gentle ambience. The breeze outside stirred again, brushing softly against the window panes as though checking in on the meal. After finishing their bowls, the two men set them gently on the counter and stepped outside. The East End greeted them with its usual mosaic of life. Sailors chatting near a lamp post, vendors setting up carts of fruits and trinkets, children weaving between the crowds with bundles of errands. Yet despite its bustle, the district carried a softness under the morning sun, a welcoming murmur that drifted through the streets like a familiar tune. Side by side, Arthur and Lewis began walking again, warmed by soup, wind, and the quiet comfort of another gentle London morning. Second night at Victoria Homes. The walk back to Victoria Homes unfolded at an unhurried pace, as though the city wished to ease Arthur and Lewis gently into the evening. The late sunlight dimmed into a soft lavender haze above the rooftops, the chimneys exhaling thin threads of smoke that drifted lazily across the sky. The wind hummed a small, almost polite tune as it nudged its way along Commercial Street, brushing past market stalls being packed away, and street vendors yawning dramatically as they closed their carts for the night. Everything around them seemed to settle into a slower rhythm, preparing itself for rest, much like a household humming its final chores before bed. When the familiar shape of Victoria Homes finally appeared, its lantern glowing like a sleepy eye above the door, Arthur felt a surprising little swell of comfort. Only one night before, he had approached it with uncertainty. Now, stepping inside felt similar to returning to a chair that had warmed to his shape. The wooden door groaned softly as he pushed it open, the same gentle complaint as last night, as if it recognized him and had prepared its usual greeting. Inside, the air held the same mild blend of human warmth, faint tobacco, and the lingering scent of boiled vegetables. Instead of feeling heavy, the mix seemed to drift like a warm fog around the common room, creating an atmosphere both familiar and strangely soothing. Arthur and Lewis exchanged a glance, the kind that required no words, simply acknowledging that they had returned to a place that expected nothing from them except to rest. A few men were scattered around the smoking room, though the energy was muted, more of a low hum than any real activity. A pair of older gentlemen leaned over the billiard table, nudging balls in slow contemplative motions as though the game itself had agreed to adopt a bedtime pace. Another man sat with a pipe between his teeth, though he appeared to have drifted halfway into sleep, the pipe bowl dimming and brightening like a tiny red lighthouse fighting drowsiness. Even the usual cough from the far bench sounded gentler than before, more like a polite reminder that someone was still awake. Arthur found himself smiling softly. There was something remarkably tender about watching a room full of tired people ease into the night without any fuss or urgency. He followed Lewis up the staircase, the boards beneath them creaking in a predictable sequence. One short groan, one long sigh, and one faint squeak that always arrived just a second too late, as if the stair had been surprised to find itself stepped on. By the time they reached the second floor, the hallway lights had been trimmed low, giving the corridor a gentle amber glow. Shadows softened along the edges of the walls, resting like folded blankets. Most doors were already shut, with only a faint bar of lamplight slipping from beneath one or two of them. The entire space carried an air of peaceful surrender to the coming night. As Arthur turned the corner toward his room, a faint tremor of sound reached him, soft, wavering, almost like someone dreaming with their eyes open. The voice rose and fell in quick murmurs, shifting from relief to confusion, and then to a peculiar mix of fear and apology. He recognized the pattern. Someone nearby had slipped into a mild, alcohol-induced hallucination, the kind of drifting episode that came from a day too long and a drink too cheap. But even this, in the calm of Victoria homes, felt softened. The voice never rose sharply. It wavered like a loose curtain in a mild breeze, moving without threat, trembling without direction. Arthur paused, only long enough to ensure the sounds carried no distress. When a moment later, the murmurs quieted and settled into gentle muttering, he continued down the hallway with steady, untroubled steps. Feeling the need to wash off the day's dust, Arthur slipped into the small washroom at the end of the corridor. A single lantern flickered inside, casting warm, golden ripples across the cracked tiles. The basin held cool water that smelled faintly of iron, but felt wonderfully refreshing against his palms. He cupped a handful and splashed it onto his face, the coldness waking his skin gently. When he lifted his head, the mirror before him offered a shy, uneven reflection. Its surface was speckled and slightly warped, as though it preferred to show the world only in softened outlines. Arthur saw his own features blurred at the edges, his hair slightly out of place from the evening wind, his eyes tired but peaceful. Something about the imperfect mirror seemed comforting, like a friend who refused to judge too sharply, choosing instead to reflect only the calmest parts of him. He spent a moment studying the softened image, appreciating how the lantern light smoothed every angle. He almost looked like a gentler version of himself, the kind he imagined might appear in quiet dreams. After drying his face with the coarse towel that always hung from the same hook, he nodded to the mirror, as if thanking it for its kindness. Back in his room, the bed awaited with its slight dip in the middle and its lopsided blanket pulled neatly over the top. The tiny athletes living within the mattress seemed unusually polite tonight, either resting or drafting their workout schedule for the following evening. Arthur eased himself down, feeling the frame sigh softly beneath him, and pulled the blanket up to his chest. The room settled into silence around him. From somewhere outside, the wind brushed gently against the glass, carrying faint murmurs from the street below. Inside, Victoria Holmes exhaled one long, peaceful breath. The second night embraced Arthur like an old friend, guiding him slowly, steadily towards sleep. Railway work with Jonas. Morning arrived at Victoria Holmes with the gentle persuasion of soft light sliding through thin curtains and the building's usual collection of slow, yawning creaks. Arthur felt rested enough to rise, though not rushed in any way. The peaceful rhythm of the house seemed determined to cradle him for as long as he wished to stay wrapped in its warmth. Still, he managed to gather himself, smoothing his shirt and brushing a hand through his hair, before stepping into the hallway, where the faint aroma of early tea drifted lazily from below. Bram was already waiting at the foot of the stairs, leaning comfortably against the railing as though it had invited him to stay a while. His posture was relaxed, and his smile was warm in its familiar, slightly sleepy way. "Morning, Arthur," he murmured in a tone so gentle it seemed to float. "Ready for another calm adventure?" Arthur returned the smile with ease. As ready as anyone facing a day of honest work can hope to be. Before Bram could add to the sentiment, Jonas appeared from the common room carrying a small bundle of bread wrapped neatly in cloth. Jonas had a way of moving that suggested he believed everything in life should proceed at half the usual speed, a charming contrast to the loud bustle of London outside. "Breakfast," he announced, lifting the bundle slightly. "I think it's bread, or something that used to be bread, but it's friendly enough." The three men shared a brief chuckle before stepping out into the cool morning air. The sky above them held the soft gray-blue hue of a London dawn, with thin clouds drifting as though resisting the idea of waking fully. The streets around Commercial Street were still quiet, touched only by the earliest stirrings of vendors and the gentle glide of carts beginning their routes. The city had not yet found its daytime rhythm, giving the trio a perfectly serene backdrop for their walk. Their destination lay near the railway cutting, a stretch of land carved deeply into the earth where construction crews spent long days clearing, lifting, digging, and reshaping the terrain to accommodate new tracks. Arthur had seen the area once before, but approaching it now, with the morning breeze brushing lightly against his coat, felt surprisingly peaceful. Bram and Jonas kept an easy pace, making small observations about passing rooftops or friendly cats, perched in windowsills as though they were narrating a quiet stroll, rather than preparing for several hours of coordinated physical labor. When they reached the cutting, the scene was a soft hum, rather than the loud tangle of noise Arthur had expected. Workers moved with steady, deliberate motions, their boots tapping gently against the packed soil. Tools clinked in mild rhythms, and the occasional shout from the foreman sounded more like a distant echo than anything harsh. Even the birds circling overhead seemed to chirp in a considerate tone. The foreman, a tall man, with a calm expression and arms that suggested he had long ago befriended heavy lifting, approached with a relaxed nod. "You three," he said mildly, pointing toward a section of earth that needed clearing. "Slow and steady. No rush. Let the day take the shape it wants." It was easily the gentlest instruction Arthur had ever heard from someone in charge of a work site. The three men took their tools and began working in patient motions. Arthur dug at the soil with long, even strokes, feeling the ground give way without protest. Bram settled into a methodical rhythm beside him, humming a soft tune that matched the pace of the day. Jonas, meanwhile, approached each task with casual acceptance, offering commentary such as, "This dirt is quite polite today," or, "I think this shovel likes me," with a straight face that made Arthur stifle quiet laughter. Despite the physical demands, the work unfolded in a strangely calming manner. The trio moved like a small, steady team of clock gears, turning, lifting, clearing, and placing, with a uniform motion that never strained nor stumbled. The earth carried a soft, crumbly texture, and occasionally a breeze wandered through the cutting to cool their faces. Even the sun, when it peeked through the clouds, seemed to shine with gentle intention rather than blazing authority. As the hours passed, the workers around them continued their tasks in the same peaceful cadence. Arthur often glanced along the trench to see men wiping their brows or stretching their backs in slow, relaxed gestures. This unity of motion, this shared acceptance of the day's weight, seemed to knit the group together in a comforting quietness. No one hurried, no one groaned dramatically. Everyone simply participated in the patient transformation of the earth. Occasionally, Bram narrated small observations to lighten the moment. "If the dirt gets any softer," he said once, "I might try convincing it to dig itself." Jonas added, "Be careful. It might agree, and then we'd be out of work." Arthur let himself laugh gently at their banter, warmed by the camaraderie that made even heavy tasks feel tranquil. As midday approached, a break was called. The men sat along the edge of the cutting, legs dangling over the work site while they enjoyed their modest lunches. Bram took small, deliberate bites of his bread, as though evaluating it for its life wisdom. Jonas offered Arthur half of his own portion, announcing in a cheerful murmur, "Sharing improves digestion." Probably. When the break ended, they returned to their steady pace, allowing the afternoon to unfold like a slow-moving cloud. The light shifted gradually across the cutting, softening the earth's colors and creating gentle shadows that stretched each time they paused to adjust their tools. Arthur felt the rhythm settle into him like a lullaby. One swing, one breath, one step, all blending seamlessly. By late afternoon, the foreman returned with a nod of satisfaction. "Good work," he said, handing each man a small but welcome payment. The coins clinked softly into Arthur's hand, carrying a warm, reassuring weight. Modest as the pay was, it represented the calm success of a day spent in steady company, gentle motion, and peaceful labor. As the trio walked back toward Commercial Street, Arthur tucked the coins safely into his pocket. The evening wind greeted them with its familiar soft hum, and the city around them settled once more into the quiet embrace of approaching night. A small card of hope. Evening drifted gently across Commercial Street as Arthur, Bram, and Jonas made their way back toward Victoria Homes after the long but soothing day at the railway cutting. The sky above them held a soft lavender glow that slowly deepened into blue, while the breeze followed with an almost polite persistence, nudging at their coats as though reminding them that the night was ready to settle in. The men walked at an easy pace, warm with the quiet satisfaction that came from honest work done without hurry or strain. When the lantern above Victoria Homes flickered into view, tilting slightly in its usual sleepy fashion, Arthur felt the familiar wave of comfort wash over him. The wooden door offered its routine creak of welcome, and the warm air inside carried the mild scent of supper, old wood, and friendly exhaustion. It was the scent of a place where many small stories unfolded each day without insisting on drama. Bram gave a small wave as he headed toward the smoking room, while Jonas, with a soft murmur about needing to stretch his legs, disappeared toward the kitchen. Arthur made his way up the first few steps when a gentle voice called his name. Arthur. He turned to find Harper, one of the long-timers at Victoria Homes, standing near the stairwell. Harper was a man of quiet composure, recognizable by the way he carried himself, with an unspoken understanding of the building's rhythms. His coat was worn at the seams, but always brushed clean. His voice, soft yet steady, held the weight of someone who had learned to speak only when words had a useful job to do. Arthur stepped closer with a polite nod. "Evening, Harper." Harper returned the nod in his slow, thoughtful way. "Heard you've been working at the cutting. Steady hands, they say." His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Not a bad start. Arthur accepted the compliment with a quiet dip of his head. The work was good. Jonas and Bram made it easier. "Aye, good men," Harper murmured. "Good to see you settling in your own way." There was a gentle pause, the kind that Victoria Homes seemed fond of, moments where silence acted as a soft cushion rather than an empty space. Harper reached into his inner coat pocket with deliberate care, then pulled out a small card, slightly worn at the edges but clean, with tidy handwriting across its surface. He held it out to Arthur. "This," Harper said simply, "is for the dock master at Wapping. He's always looking for men who can read, follow instructions, and show up sober enough to lift without wobbling." The slight crease at his eyes hinted at humor. "He and I crossed paths years ago. Might still remember my name, or at least pretend to." Arthur accepted the card with gentle hands. The edges were smooth from having been carried for years, and the ink, though faded, remained clear. The card felt unexpectedly warm, as though it had been waiting in Harper's pocket for the right moment to find new purpose. "Thank you," Arthur said softly, careful not to let the words carry too much weight. This was not a moment for grand declarations, only quiet appreciation. Harper nodded once. "It might get you in the door. Nothing guaranteed. Dockmaster can be particular, but it's a start." Arthur looked at the card again, letting its simple presence settle into him. He didn't feel a rush of excitement, only a calm, steady warmth, like the gentle glow of a lantern beginning to brighten at dusk. After a moment, he slipped the card safely into his coat pocket. "If it works," Arthur said in a soft voice, "I'll make sure to bring Lewis along. He deserves a chance, too." Harper's eyes softened. "Good lad, that one. A bit untidy in the hair, maybe," he added with a trace of humor. but his spirit's sound. Just needs a door to knock on. Arthur smiled quietly at the idea. Lewis did have a sort of permanent disarray to him, as though every breeze in London felt personally invited to rearrange his hair. "I'll bring him with me," Arthur repeated in the same calm tone. "No sense going forward alone." Harper gave a slow, approving nod. "That's the way of it. If one gets a foothold, best pull another up. Roads feel shorter when shared." Another gentle silence settled between them. Arthur felt the card's presence like a small promise resting against his chest, not a bright, blazing hope, but a soft, candle-like one, the sort that didn't demand celebration, only quiet endurance. Finally, Harper gave a slight gesture toward the stairs. "Go on then. Wash up. Rest. Tomorrow doesn't mind waiting." Arthur nodded gratefully and headed up the steps. The familiar creaking stair greeted him, one long groan, one short chirp, before yielding under his weight in its usual rhythm. When he reached the washroom, the lantern inside cast its slow golden shimmer across the cracked mirror. Arthur splashed cool water on his face, letting the droplets chase down his cheeks, carrying away the dust of the day. He looked at his reflection, not dramatically changed, but gentler around the eyes, steadier in posture. The faint light made him look slightly more hopeful, though in a humble, sleepy sort of way. The card in his pocket added a subtle shape to his silhouette, a quiet reminder of the small path opening before him. Returning to his room, Arthur eased himself onto the familiar lopsided bed. The little athletes beneath the mattress seemed fairly calm tonight, perhaps saving their warm-up laps for later. Arthur lay back, letting the blanket settle softly over him. He didn't feel triumphant nor anxious, just quietly aware that tomorrow held a new possibility, a modest one wrapped in the simple weight of a card, passed from one tired but generous hand to another. As the wind brushed gently at the window, Arthur closed his eyes, letting sleep drift toward him like a small boat gliding into harbor, slow, steady, and wonderfully peaceful. Stepping into a new level, morning arrived with a soft brightness that slipped gently across Arthur's pillow, warming the edges of his thoughts before he even opened his eyes. The slight hum of Victoria homes greeted him, timber beams stretching, distant footsteps drifting like slow-moving clouds, and the muted chatter of early risers gathering in the kitchen below. It felt like a familiar tune he had begun to know by heart. Yet beneath the calm, a small thread of anticipation tugged quietly at him, reminding him of the card resting safely inside his coat pocket. Today was the day he would visit the dockmaster at Wapping. Arthur washed up, brushed his hair with a few half-awake strokes, and stepped out into the corridor. As he headed down the stairs, he found Lewis already waiting near the door, his hair still showing its traditional negotiation with gravity. "You look calm," Lewis observed in a low tone that carried a sleepy smile. "Too calm, actually. Maybe you should lend me half that calmness, and I'll finally manage to keep my hair in order." Arthur chuckled softly. "It's a special gift, I suppose." Together they walked through the gentle morning air, passing shopkeepers yawning as they lifted shutters and a pair of cats engaged in slow-motion conversation on a window ledge. The wind drifted lightly around them, carrying hints of river water and yesterday's cooked fish, as if trying to offer a preview of Wapping's personality. When the docks finally came into view, Arthur felt a wave of serene steadiness wash over him. The area hummed with activity, but in a quiet, deliberate way. Workers hauling ropes with practiced ease, sailors securing crates with gentle thuds, and the river itself gliding by in slow, glistening currents. The dockmaster's office stood just slightly apart from the bustle, a modest wooden structure with a tidy window, and a door that looked sturdier than necessary. Arthur approached with measured steps. Lewis beside him offering a reassuring nod. Inside, the dockmaster sat at a desk that appeared to have known at least 20 years of paperwork, and perhaps even more cups of tea. He was a man built like the docks themselves, solid, weathered, and steady. Yet his eyes carried a quiet sharpness, the kind that could count crates with a glance or determine a worker's honesty by the way he folded his hands. Arthur offered the card Harper had given him. The dockmaster took it with a measured look, turning it between his fingers as though evaluating the loyalty of the paper itself. Then he read the name, hummed softly in recognition, and gave a slow nod. "Harper," he said through a thoughtful breath. "Haven't seen him in a while. Reliable man. Didn't talk much, which I always considered a point in his favor." He looked up at Arthur with a gaze that felt both assessing and patient. "It says here you've got good sense and steady hands. You read? Count properly? Show up on time?" "Yes, sir," Arthur answered, his tone calm and unforced. The dockmaster studied him for another heartbeat, then stood up in a way that seemed to shift the entire air of the room. "All right," he said simply. "You start today. Light duty first. Get used to the rhythm before we trust you with anything heavier." Lewis nearly straightened with excitement, though he tried to disguise it by adjusting his jacket in a very casual, very unnecessary way. Arthur inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you. Truly." The dockmaster waved a hand as though brushing away excessive gratitude. "Just work steady. That's all the thanks I need." And just like that, Arthur had stepped into a new chapter, quietly, without fanfare, carried forward by the calm assurance of a man offering him a chance. The day unfolded with the soothing predictability the dockmaster seemed to prefer. Arthur learned the layout of the yard, the rhythm of incoming shipments, and the simple but satisfying order of stacking, sorting, and recording. The work was steady, the tools familiar, and the atmosphere calm enough that even Lewis's naturally messy hair seemed to fall into something approaching cooperation. By midday, the river shimmered under a mild sun, and the workers rested along the dock's edge with quiet ease. Lewis nudged Arthur gently. "Well," he murmured, "looks like you've stepped upward." Arthur smiled lightly. "A small step, but steady enough." Lewis stretched his legs with great ceremony. "Does this mean you'll forget all us humble folk back at Victoria Homes when you become a grand figure of dockside authority?" "Absolutely," Arthur answered in a perfectly serious tone before breaking into a soft laugh. "Or perhaps I'll simply bring you along." Lewis grinned. "Now that's more like it." When the day's work came to a close, the dockmaster approached and handed Arthur a modest packet of pay, the first of his new position. The coins clinked softly, a sound that felt both grounding and encouraging. "Keep steady," the dockmaster said, not unkindly. "Steady men climb." Arthur dipped his head again. "I will." With the weight of the coins warm in his pocket, he and Lewis began the walk back toward Commercial Street. But this time Arthur didn't return to Victoria Homes. Instead, they stopped at a nearby lodging house known for being just a notch above the simple comfort of his former place. The door frame was straighter, the windows clearer, the mattresses rumored to hold fewer athletes. Arthur paid for a small room with clean sheets and a window that looked upon a quiet part of the street. It wasn't luxury, nor was it meant to be. It was simply a gentle step forward. Lewis helped him carry his small belongings, placing them carefully on the single chair provided. "Not bad," Lewis murmured. "Feels like the sort of place where the floorboards apologize before creaking." Arthur nodded with a warm smile. "It'll do nicely." The evening settled around them like a soft shawl. Arthur stood by the window, watching the lamps flicker to life along the street. He didn't feel triumphant nor overwhelmed, just quietly lifted, as though a soft breeze had nudged him gently upward. A new chapter, simple and warm, had begun. With a quiet breath, Arthur's new lodging house carried a gentle hush that made the evenings feel softly folded, like a blanket smoothed by practiced hands. The window in his small room framed a slice of London that appeared gentler than the city he had first wandered through. Lamps glowing with a steady confidence, shop fronts settling into calm silhouettes, and the occasional passerby, strolling with the slow certainty of someone who trusted the night not to hurry them along. It was peaceful, in a way that welcomed reflection, and as Arthur sat on the edge of his modest but surprisingly cooperative mattress, he let his thoughts drift back toward the place that had shaped his last chapter, Victoria Homes. He could almost hear the familiar creak of the stairs, the signature greeting the building offered every time he climbed them. Each step had possessed its own personality, one that chirped with a bright little squeak, another that grumbled with elderly dignity, and one in particular that seemed perpetually confused about whether it wished to make noise at all. Together they had formed a strange but endearing chorus that had followed him up and down the floors like a sleepy escort. Arthur remembered the way the smoking room glowed in its hazy amber light, shadows curling lazily along the walls as the regulars puffed their pipes in slow, thoughtful motions. Nothing urgent ever seemed to happen there. Even the billiard balls moved with an unhurried glide, as though they too had subscribed to the lodge's philosophy of conserving energy. He could almost picture Bram leaning over a green felt table, offering one of his mild, philosophical observations about the universe, usually related to bread, spoons, or the exact number of hours a pipe could reasonably smoke itself. And then there were the nights, softened by the murmurs of the building settling into its own rest. The walls had carried quiet melodies of weary breathing, hushed conversations, and the occasional heroic performance from the tiny athletes beneath the mattress. Arthur had never grown particularly fond of them, but he had learned to appreciate their enthusiasm. They had been, in their own energetic way, part of the lodge's character, a bit too lively perhaps, but undeniably committed to their craft. His time at Victoria Homes had unfolded gently, day by day, like pages of a book without sharp corners. There had been no sudden storms, no dramatic upheavals, only the steady rhythm of men living side by side, each trying to carve out a small pocket of rest within the sprawling hum of London. He remembered moments of quiet kindness, like Bram sharing a scrap of bread, or Lewis offering a cheerful nudge on difficult mornings. These gestures had been small enough to go unnoticed by the larger world, yet large enough to leave their mark within him. Arthur thought of Harper next, the man whose presence had been as solid and grounding as the beams of the lodge itself. Harper spoke rarely, but when he did, his words felt like anchors dropped into calm waters. The card he had given Arthur, worn, edges softened by years, had changed the trajectory of Arthur's days with simple, gentle purpose. Arthur hoped Harper continued to find steady footing in the familiar rhythm of Victoria homes. Some men thrived through movement, while others found their strength in being steadfast, and Harper seemed very much the latter. Arthur let out a slow, thoughtful breath. Stepping into a better lodging house had not created a grand shift. Rather, it felt like an exhale, a settling. The new space offered quiet light, warm bedding, and hallways that creaked in a politely restrained way. It was not luxurious, but it was kind. And kindness, Arthur had learned, was worth far more than comfort alone. As he sat by the window watching the lights flicker across the rooftops, he felt no longing to return to the old lodge, nor any desire to forget it. Victoria Homes was simply part of the road he had walked, a chapter written in soft pencil, meant to guide him rather than define him. Lewis visited often, still appearing with hair that looked as though it had lost an argument with the wind on the way over. He would drop into the chair beside Arthur's bed, stretch his legs in exaggerated fashion, and ask about the docks with the air of someone expecting thrilling tales of cargo and crates. Arthur always replied with steady, soothing descriptions that made even heavy lifting sound like a leisurely exercise. Lewis would listen, nod, and then proclaim that he too might seek employment by the river. If only my hair would agree to the early mornings. Arthur smiled at the thought, leaning back slightly so the mattress sighed beneath him. The city outside continued its gradual descent into night. Lamps glowed with their steady amber halos, casting gentle pools of light that softened the corners of the street. A distant cart rattled by in slow rhythm, the horse trotting with the deliberate pace of an animal well versed in nighttime etiquette. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, the Thames hummed a fluid lullaby, water brushing calmly against its banks. London could be loud, sharp, and overwhelming, but there were nights like this, when it seemed to breathe in harmony with its quieter inhabitants. Arthur watched a single window illuminate in a distant building, then dim moments later, like a sigh slipping gently into the dark. The city was settling, and so was he. The breeze drifted softly through the small gap in his window frame, carrying with it the cool scent of evening and a faint trace of distant chimney smoke. It brushed against his cheek, encouraging him to relax, to ease into the soft quiet around him. Arthur let his shoulders drop, his breath deepen. He thought about how far he had come, not in distance but in steadiness. His life had not transformed with fireworks or sudden miracles. Instead, it had shifted subtly like the slow tilting of a lantern wick, brightening the room by degrees, too gentle to notice until the whole space glowed differently. He felt grateful for that. As the night settled fully over London, Arthur stretched out onto his quietly cooperative mattress. The blanket felt warm, the pillow familiar, and the soft hum of the city below lulled him deeper. No grand endings, no urgent beginnings. Just a simple, steady breath. A breath that carried him gently into sleep, while London, outside his window, rested with him in calm, tender harmony.